Hello, and welcome to episode 118 of Public Interest Podcast with your host, Jordan Cooper, where we interview politicians, activists, advocates, and others who seek to improve the state of the world. We are here today with Brooke Lierman, a delegate in Maryland's General Assembly from the 46th Legislative District in Baltimore City. She sits on the Appropriations Committee and is a civil rights attorney in a Baltimore City law firm. Brooke, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great. Thanks so much.
Excellent. The first question I'd like to pose to you is, what are you currently doing, or what have you ever done to advance the public interest, and why?
That's a pretty broad question, Jordan. Do you want me to start from birth, or?
That'll work. Whatever.
You only have 25 minutes. No. I was really, I was raised to believe in the need to give back, and that we we don't get where we are on our own. It's a teamwork effort, and we have to help lift up people because, we've had the benefit of being lifted up ourselves. So I, in college, I helped start and then later worked on as an AmeriCorps Vista, a mentoring program called the DREAM program that is going strong, and it pairs college students with individuals in kids in public housing to create mentoring matchups. And there's now a DREAM program at every college in Vermont, at Dartmouth, at Harvard, and it's continuing to grow. So I think that was one of the my early forays into leadership in a public way. And it really opened my eyes to a lot of what was going on around the country in areas that I hadn't seen before.
So this was in New England that you were in AmeriCorps?
Yeah. It was in New England. I went to college in New Hampshire, and then I did AmeriCorps Vista in Burlington, Vermont, and just sort of seeing and experiencing and starting to understand what rural poverty looks like.
What were some of your experiences like in up there?
Sure. Well, I'll never forget. We took a group of kids who lived not too far from Dartmouth, where I went for college. My senior year, we took a whole bunch of kids down to Boston for a field trip one day. And, it's only 2 hours away. It's not that far. It's the biggest, closest city to them. And we were all in a line, and we got ready to go onto the T. And we had to take an escalator. And
for our listeners who don't know what the T is, it's the subway.
The subway for Baltimore, or for Boston. And we got to the escalator, and the kids sort of stopped. And most of them had never seen an escalator before, and these are middle school children, and it was sort of profound. It was really eye opening, the sort of their inability to sort of escape or get out of their environment. And but to be honest, we have the same thing in urban poverty areas too. Kids who are stuck in their neighborhoods. And yet just a couple miles away, life expectancy is much longer, and there's, many more resources. So it's a sort of being stuck in place issue that a lot of people in poverty face.
And some of the urban kids may never have seen a farm or a cow, for instance.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Or they don't feel welcome at the harbor or, at our parks. So I think it's an interesting, something I really feel like part of my role is to break down barriers and expand opportunity for my constituents, but, and also for all Marylanders. So I take that really seriously.
Have you been able to stay in touch at all with any of the mentees and see what the effect over time has been?
Yep. So 2 girls who I was particularly close with, they were twins, and neither of their parents had graduated from high school. And both of the girls graduated from high school, and one received her associate's degree, and they're both doing well. And I'm friends with them on Facebook and get to follow what they're doing, which is really fun. And it's pretty awesome to see. Yeah. So, but I then worked on campaigns after college, and in between Vista, I worked on campaigns around the country. So I worked for Senator Paul Wellstone on his 2002 reelection campaign in Minnesota, which was an incredible experience. I really learned how to be an organizer and work with people towards a bigger goal. Also a devastating experience because he died. Really amazing experience.
He died during the campaign?
Yep. So he and his wife and daughter and several campaign staff died in an airplane crash, I think a week before or 10 days before the election. So it was pretty, and it was right after he'd voted against authorizing a war in Iraq, and it was devastating. I was very young, and but it really brought me a lot closer to all the people I worked with, who I'm still in touch with from the campaign, and gave me a sort of sense of purpose as well. He used to say, a quote he used to say a lot was, "Never separate the life you lead from the words you speak." And I have that quote on my wall in my office, and sort of it's one of my mantras.
So in a sense, you are a living legacy of Senator Paul Wellstone. So later in this episode, when I ask you about your legacy and how the world is affected by the life of Brooke Lierman, you kind of can say, well, how was the world affected by the life of Senator Paul Wellstone? He's not with us anymore, but in a sense he is. His words are on your wall, and you're actively making laws in the state of Maryland in accordance with his credo.
Certainly, and I think that's how he is for a lot of people. And everybody has their the people that they seek to emulate and who they respect, and he was definitely one of mine, a very important figure for me.
How did you get out there in the Midwest, starting on the East Coast, and then having starting in Maryland?
Well, I knew he was up for re-election, and I just really respected and admired him, and so I made some inquiries and figured out a way to land a job as a field organizer. So I drove my little Volkswagen Jetta out there and started working in Rochester, Minnesota. And it was great. And after that, I sort of was hooked on campaigns. I loved working on campaigns. And I then worked for Howard Dean. And then after Dean, after that didn't work out, I then worked on the Kerry campaign. I was the deputy GOTV director in Wisconsin. And probably
let me interrupt you.
But
before we get to Kerry, Dean, were you with Dean during the whole scream incident, in which when you actually watched the video, he wasn't actually screaming?
So I was his Wisconsin field director, and so I wasn't there in Iowa. But we watched it, and then we watched sort of with horror as what happened after that, which was really unfortunate. But I think, look, he did great work as the DNC chair at the 50-state strategy, and I think he really helped lay the ground for the 2008 election and 2006 election. So, I was glad where he ended up in a good place and doing a lot of good for the Democratic Party, I think.
So you moved on from his campaign to another presidential campaign. You were with Kerry?
Yep. I worked at the Center for American Progress in D.C. After the Dean campaign, but I actually took a month off, the month of October through the election, to work as the deputy GOTV director for the state of Wisconsin. The GOTV director was my friend Robbie Moxley, and he asked me to come help run Wisconsin with him. And in 2004, there was a lot of thought that it was going to go Republican. So we were happy we won it, even though Kerry didn't prevail, but at least in Wisconsin we kept it blue.
So 2 points there. Actually, a few points. One, for our listeners, GOTV stands for Get Out the Vote. For the next listeners who don't know, when Brooke Lierman refers to blue, she refers to Democrats. And finally, Brooke Lierman is the sort of individual who takes vacation from a liberal think tank in order to work long hours on a liberal campaign before an election. That's vacation for Brooke. So I just wanted to get that out.
It was definitely, that was my vacation. Well, my vacation this year was to go to the DNC convention for Hillary, and then another vacation was to take a week working in Pittsburgh for Hillary at the end of the election. So, you do what you can.
But you have a husband and children too, don't you?
Yep. So I'm married to a great guy who is a lawyer at Ballard Spar, and I have a 4-year-old son, Teddy.
So how on earth, with a small child and your family and your other job, how are you balancing it all? You're a delegate, you're a civil rights attorney, and yet you're still bouncing around on different people's campaigns all over the country.
Sure. Well, I don't do as many campaigns anymore since I'm now in elected office. But, and my campaign days were sort of all pre-law school. And I loved working on campaigns because you meet amazing people and you're really doing something that you think will advance the greater good in a big way. And I do believe in the power of politics to make social change. But after that, I went off to law school, and since law school, I haven't worked on quite as many campaigns, at least in a full-time capacity. Although during law school, I did go out in '08 to Nevada, and I took a month off of law school, or maybe like 3 weeks, to go to Nevada for the end of the campaign there to work for Hillary.
Wow.
Yeah, it was fun. I mean, I just love, it's so engaging, and it's important work, and at least to me, so I enjoy doing it.
So if you were friends with Robbie Mook, did he end it, for our listeners, can you first say who he was, and then second after that, due to his role in the White House, is that something that ever appealed to you?
Yeah, so Robbie is a fantastic campaign organizer, and I met him first on Howard Dean's campaign, and then he worked for Hillary in '08. He ran Terry McAuliffe's campaign, and here in Maryland, he was the campaign or the director of the coordinated campaign in 2006. So he has some Maryland time too, but most recently he was Hillary Clinton's campaign manager. So that is who Robbie Mook is. But he's never worked in the White House. He's always done, at least since I've known him, he's done campaigning and organizing. Got it.
So what led to you leaving the campaign trail to head to law school? How did that come about?
Well, I loved being an organizer, and I realized that the further up the chain of command I got, the further away from people I got. So I was not talking to voters or talking to volunteers when I was deputy GOTV director. I was talking to staff and headquarters. And what I really loved was talking to people, like talking to voters and talking to volunteers. And that's who I loved working with. So I decided at the end of the day that although I loved working on campaigns, it wasn't what I was going to do for the rest of my life. And I wanted another tool in my toolbox to sort of advance progressive values and to help people. And it seemed like having a legal background would be good for that. So I went to law school at the University of Texas in Austin. I loved it. And then I moved to Baltimore. I had a brief stop in Boston and then down to Baltimore.
Was Baltimore just an employment opportunity, or did you have any particular plans to end up there?
I really wanted to move there. I applied for federal clerkships, and I only applied in Maryland. And because I wanted to come back to the East Coast, but I thought Baltimore, for whatever reason, really appealed to me. It seemed like a great city, a fun city with wonderful neighborhoods, but also a place where somebody who was really invested could make a difference, and could, find themselves. And that has come true for me. It's one of the, it really feels like home.
Now, Maryland plays a significant role in the life of your family. You do come from a politically active family. Would you talk for a minute about the role that your family has had in shaping your political development, for one, and then as a corollary, if you could talk about why Baltimore is opposed to seeking elected office closer to home in the part of Maryland where you grew up in?
Sure. So I grew up in Washington, D.C. until 8th grade. I believe we moved to Bethesda, and then I went to Walt Whitman High School. And my family, my mom is a nurse practitioner. She used to work at Children's Hospital and then at a community health center. And my father had a lobbying company for many years and then became very active in Democratic politics in Maryland, and ran for Congress in 2000, ultimately unsuccessfully against Connie Morella. That was one of the first campaigns I worked on and had an amazing time. I was really proud of everything he did. And I think a lot of people who worked on his campaign ultimately ran for office themselves. So that was exciting to see. So first place I met Craig Zucker, for instance. Now a state senator from Montgomery County. My parents really raised me to believe in social justice and to believe in the power of politics to transform the world for the better. And I still believe that. And so they were absolutely instrumental in encouraging me to work on campaigns and in supporting me when I decided to run for office myself, and definitely wouldn't be here without, my parents or my brothers.
So you're in Baltimore. You're the progeny of a Democratic scion. You have now become the first elected official in your family. You're in Annapolis representing the good people of South Baltimore and a little bit of East Baltimore. How do you get your sense of direction? What are you trying to really advocate for in appropriations in Annapolis? What's your mission and when you're a delegate?
Sure. So when I ran for office, I ran ultimately because I was frustrated by what I experienced in Baltimore City that was, frankly, the fault of the state. The bus system was horrible, so I couldn't depend on public transit to get to work. I was representing community associations and neighborhood groups that were trying to shut down bad bars and dangerous liquor stores, and the state, and the Baltimore City Liquor Board was appointed by the governor as a state agency. I was frustrated at the situation with the parks and noted that Baltimore City got, negligible amount of park funding through program open space from the state because we have no state parks. So, I just sort of thought, wow, there are all these ways that the state is affecting Baltimore City and not always for the good. And so, maybe I could run for office and highlight the ways that the state should be, working with and empowering Baltimore City to do better and to be its best self. And that's why I ran. So when I think about the work that I'm doing, I think of how, bills that I'm putting in can move the ball forward in Baltimore and Maryland as a whole, but certainly Baltimore City and my and my constituents. So I pay a lot of attention and put in bills about public transit and MTA. I do a lot of work around paying attention in the budget to our education funding. Last year we passed a hugely important bill on program open space funding. And supporting entrepreneurs. So last couple of years, I put in a bill to support in something called the Angel Investor Tax Credit Bill, which would have, if we'd pass it, unfortunately didn't pass it, which would have created a lot more capital for entrepreneurs because we have a lot of entrepreneurs and startups in Baltimore and all over the state, of course, but in Baltimore as well. And certainly environmental bills. So this year I have a bill to prohibit the use of styrofoam containers, takeout, because there's just so much trash everywhere that's dumping into the harbor. We have something called the trash wheel in Baltimore City. It's first of its kind in the world, and it collects 14,000 polystyrene containers a month. So
they're just floating around in the harbor, and the boat goes around and picks them up, and so you're introducing a bill.
Yeah, it's not exactly a boat, but yeah, I'm introducing a bill to say let's just move the market and get rid of polystyrene in general.
Right. So, before we go any deeper into your legislative agenda, you mentioned all these different frustrations you had upon arriving to Baltimore City, yet, of course, that was after years of having been actively involved in Democratic politics around the nation. Did it really not occur to you prior to your arrival and your subsequent frustration with different issues that you might ever run for elected office, or merely were the frustrations the catalyst for your eventual decision to run for elected office?
I think they were the catalyst. So, yes and no. I sort of think of running for office as the last resort. There are so many ways that individuals can make positive change in their communities. And running for elected office is just one of those ways. So I was really concentrated on, I was part of the executive board of my neighborhood association. I was on a number of boards in the city. I'd done a lot of work on the Red Line. I was at a wonderful law firm where I was doing some, really interesting and engaging and, to me, important work on disability rights and working with community groups. So to me, there were a number of ways that I wanted to make a difference. And, it sort of just so happened that one of the things that I noticed in doing all of that work was that the state really was affecting Baltimore in some negative ways, and that there wasn't sort of a young mom professional representing the city at that time, and that maybe I had a voice that could be helpful in advancing the interests of the city and pushing through some good legislation. And so it just happened to be sort of like the right time and the right place for me. I was definitely not sort of calculating like, if I move here, then I'll, that's not how I think that running for office should ever be approached. I think it's sort of like you run if there's a need, and there's a place, and you have something that you can accomplish by running for office.
Now, I know that you were successful in shutting down some of those bars and actually getting the Liquor License Review Board to deny some licenses. As a young mom in particular, because you mentioned that's one thing that you brought to the table as a candidate, do you think that you've advanced any issues that speak to that particular demographic within the city?
Oh yeah, definitely. I mean, I can talk firsthand about what it's like to try to sign your child up for childcare. And I can, I can talk about the ways, about education, personal experience. I'm going to be sending my child to a public school in Baltimore City, and what do the resources look like, and what do we need to be doing? I don't want my family, I don't want any kid to grow up in a dangerous neighborhood. I don't want any family to have their kids growing up and attending playgrounds that are, riddled with litter. So I think, I try to bring up the importance of, keeping families in Baltimore, attracting families to Baltimore, and making sure that Baltimore City is a family-friendly city.
So, Brooke, as we approach the end of this podcast, I do have a final question for you, which I did foreshadow in the beginning of this episode, which is to ask you for a moment to reflect upon what you hope your legacy will be at the end of your career, hopefully well into the future. What do you hope to accomplish? What do all of your years of public service to date really mean? What were your real motivations? I know you've touched upon this throughout the conversation, but if you can just take a moment and reflect for our listeners on why it is you do this and what you hope at the end of the day will be the net result of all of your years and all of your hours just having been poured into advancing the public interest.
That's a big question and something I should probably spend more time thinking about, but because I am, so crazy busy all the time, haven't had a lot of time to reflect on that. But I hope that the communities that I work with, many of whom, have been traditionally ignored for a long time, feel that they have an advocate and a voice, and that they matter. When I go speak to schools, to kids, and talk to them about running for office, I hope that they walk away from that thinking wow, she ran for office. Maybe I should vote. Maybe I should run for office. So I hope that I am able to impart the importance of being involved in the political and electoral process to my constituents and to the kids that I serve. And I hope that, people will say that I sort of lived what I preached, and that I didn't just talk the talk, but I walked the walk. I think those are some of the things that I hope, people look back and say, yeah, she was a real, she was a real advocate for her neighborhoods and, and the people that she served.
And that has been Brooke Lierman, delegate of the 46th Legislative District in Baltimore City, civil rights attorney at a Baltimore City law firm, who speaks about carrying on the motto of her once mentor, Senator Wellstone, who basically and told her, look, you got to act with integrity and do what you say and use your life as a model for the virtues and values that you wish to instill in others. Brooke is someone who goes through Baltimore City and uses her experience as a young mom to have compassion and empathy for others' children around the city and the state. She speaks about trying to enhance parkland for children and for other denizens of the city. She also speaks about making safer communities, making sure that bars and restaurants adhere to regulations and make a community that's open and welcome for everyone. Brooke is somebody who's very driven to advance the public interest in myriad ways through litigation as an attorney or through legislation in Annapolis. She's someone who has given of herself around the nation because at the end of the day, giving of herself and acknowledging what has been brought to the table by others to advance herself through life leads her with only one conclusion, which is that she ought to perpetuate the munificent cycle and pay it forward. So, Brooke, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you so much, and I might have to take you around and have you introduce me from now on. That was quite a synopsis. Thank you.
You're welcome. And for our listeners, this has been episode 118 of Public Interest Podcast with your host, Jordan Cooper, where we interview politicians, activists, advocates, and others who seek to improve the state of the world. Should you wish to listen to us, please remember to join publicinterestpodcast.com and subscribe. You can also go on iTunes or listen to us on Apple products on your podcast app. Should you wish to leave a message for Brooke, you can call the number on the Contact Us tab of the website, and that message will be relayed to her. Once again, thank you so much for joining Public Interest Podcast, and we'll talk to you next time.
Thank you.